Hello, in this broadcast, the program time. In Grozny, during the day-to-day clashes continued and a tense situation remained. Incidentally, from the river of contradictory reports, it's difficult to compose an overall picture of the events. According to the press service of the government, units of the federal forces continue to control the center of the city, including the presidential palace, the railway terminal, and several administrative buildings housing the administrating organs of the Dudayev government. On the fortified positions of the unlawful armed formations and combat technology, aviation launched several attacks of high precise missiles. The situation in the city is gradually normalizing, it says in the statement of the press service of the government. Conditions for the work of the organs of local self-rule are being established, deliveries, medical facilities, and communal services. According to a correspondent of Interfax from Grozny, however, the line of contact of the Russian forces and the Chechnya insurrection passed through the area of the railway terminal today, 1.5 kilometers northwest of the presidential palace. Here by the terminal, throughout the day, fighting continued, and at 1700 hours, Russian forces were not able to reach the area of the presidential palace. By the palace and at roads to it, there are tens of units of Russian demolished combat technology. In the basement of the presidential palace, 6 injured Russian military servicemen are being kept. According to one, an officer, Alexander Bondarev, out of the 20 combat vehicles within his regiment, 17 were burned together with the crews. Events in Chechnya, which are now in the historical 1994 in the official language, were called the Operation to Disarm Unlawful Formations, now in the first days of the new year look more like a terrible war with all its repercussions, a multitude of killed, injured, and imprisoned people. It's understandable when each building in Grozny, the Dudayev supporters have turned into an inaccessible fortress in regularizing the Chechnya crisis with all possible political and economic combinations are impotent. Today, over Russian soldiers and officers, the sounds of the most contemporary weapons rang out, accumulated here over the course of 3 years, and often not without the aid of those who today so earnestly defend human rights in Chechnya. It seems that the Chechnya problem itself would have been resolved if, during all these years, it had not been used in battles in Moscow corridors of power. Today, each side involved in the Chechen crisis intensely defends his own position because of what, to find out the truth state of affairs in Grozny, is more complicated with every day. Today, for example, we addressed the Ministry of Defense with a request to clarify the situation in Grozny after the latest severe clashes, but we were politely asked to clarify that question within the temporary information center of the government of Russia. Meanwhile, according to reports from various sources, the situation in the Chechen capital remains extremely tense. Because of the conflicting information, it's not clear which forces are in control of the center of the city and how many Russian military troops have died during the last operation. According to the temporary information center, at the close of the day yesterday, combat losses of the internal forces during the entire period of combat were 25 killed and 62 injured. A correspondent of Interfax, however, only on the streets adjacent to the presidential palace, counted almost 100 killed Russian soldiers and officers. So on this backdrop of objectivity, the conclusion made by high military specialists does not sound strange at all. Given this type of operation, losses among Russian troops are even less than previously calculated. Our film crew of combat television found itself in the path of fire of 3 combat vehicles which were approaching from the direction of the city. You hear the incessant shooting. Fighting is underway. Today this tank was hit with a grenade launcher. Several other combat vehicles are out of commission. Losses are being specified. Basically, these are mercenaries and criminal gangs, various formations which are fighting. How well are they armed? They're extremely well armed with all types of contemporary weapons. We're experiencing this ourselves through our casualties, and we have several. They're very well armed. There are defectors here who demand that our troops should enter more quickly in order to liberate and help more quickly. We are located at the spot of the 104th Air Paratrooper Division in its new position. As of 2 days ago, here there was a powerful group of Dudayev formations. During the night, of course, one can't light a fire or anything because there are snipers from adjacent villages and mountains. You can see on the right in the rear. That is, from 4 sides. In essence, we are under fire. The Vice Premier of the Government of Russia, Nikolai Yegorov, and the Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence, Sergei Stepashin, flew out today to the area of Tolstoy Yurt, where currently there are 200 refugees from Grozny. On that same plane for the refugees, humanitarian aid was delivered. Today, to the hospital, which is located on the fringe of Mozdok, 15 children from Grozny were taken in. As a correspondent of Itartas was told by military medics, the children were saved from under the rubble of a collapsed building. As Interfax learned, today in the Kremlin a meeting was held between the aide of the President of Russia on issues of national security, Yuri Baturin, with a group of deputies of the State Duma who returned from Chechnya. The meeting was organized with the objective of discussing the immediate possible restoration of constitutional lawfulness and law and order in this Northern Caucasus Republic, the subject of the Russian Federation, and measures to minimize casualties in the conflict zone. In the next days, possibly, the Security Council will meet in order to analyze the situation which has developed in Chechnya and around it in the last days. The picture of occurrences in Chechnya was supplemented today at a press conference by the Deputy of the State Duma, Alexander Asovtsev, and the Deputy of the Federative Council, Viktor Kurochkin, who have returned from Grozny. In the storming of Grozny, witnessed by the deputies, Russian tanks were severed from the infantry division, literally within the first moments, and were doomed to annihilation. On the 30th of December, on the square in front of the presidential palace, the deputies counted 6 immobilized tanks and the same number of armored vehicles. On the next day, 180 more armored vehicles, according to them, were incinerated. In the city, fighting is constant. At night, bomb attacks are held. In front of the palace, there lay tens of bodies. I would like to single this out, the catastrophic state of the Russian army. Many officers and prisoners. Only in the basement of the presidential palace are around 100 in number, prisoners, in such a nervous state, and they assert that they were planted. Deputies, citing the heads of Chechnya, asserted that within the city during the last days, 20,000 insurrectionists arrived. The fighting spirit of the insurrectionist troops is extremely high. They will not surrender, nor capitulate, nor relinquish their weapons, and will fight till the end. Today, after the meeting of the Coordinating Council of the faction Russia's Choice of the State Duma, where information was discussed from deputies who were in Grozny, Igor Gaidars addressed the press. The situation which we extrapolate from this information indicates enormous losses among the Russian armed forces, and the fact that in Grozny a serious military catastrophe has occurred from the 31st of December and the 1st and 2nd of January. In our view, the occurrence naturally, again, is evidence of a risky adventurism of that course for a military resolution of the problem which was chosen, and at the same time dramatically increases the threat of the formation of an authoritarian regime in Russia, which I honestly think will be headed not by those who are in power today. An alternative to that, he said, was to stop massive bombings of Grozny and begin dialogue. As Igor Gaidar stated, the faction will attempt to have the State Duma convene to submit amendments on the Constitution to create a mechanism of parliamentary control, draft laws on the status of those participating in the conflict, and glasnost for what occurs in the army, and also to hold parliamentary hearings on the situation in Chechnya, so that, Igor Gaidar said, one could expose those who are all directly responsible for this. The leader of the Russian Choice faction feels that Boris Yeltsin should fire Yegorov, Gorchov, Lobov, and others who, according to him, have pushed the president into this adventure. Igor Gaidar stated that the faction, as previously, is against impeaching the president so as to not completely destroy the young institutes of Russian democracy, although he does not absolve the president of responsibility for occurrences in Chechnya. The faction supported the deputy Vorontsov's proposal to nominate Sergei Kovalyov as a candidate for the Nobel Peace Prize. At a press conference also publicized was the open letter of the authorized human rights representative of the Russian Federation, Sergei Kovalyov, to the Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin, in which doubt is expressed that the head of the government and the president have reliable information on the true situation in Grozny, where peaceful residents are dying and fighters of the warring sides. Sergei Kovalyov writes that the Chechen side has expressed readiness to immediately launch dialogues, and he noticed also that blood in Grozny is flowing not for the sake of resolving the Chechen conflict. What is bleeding is the young, unripened Russian democracy. Today, in an interview to Interfax, the first aide of the President of Russia, Viktor Ilyushin, stated that it's unlikely anyone currently can calculate the precise time for the full resolution of the crisis in Chechnya. However, it's evident that the most serious step toward its finale in the interests of Russia and all Russians could be the official Grozny immediately engaging in dialogue with the federal authorities without any preliminary conditions. Currently, Ilyushin feels very much depends on the Chechen authorized leadership, because the authorized representatives of the Russian head of state are constantly in the crisis region, and therefore Dudayev has no problems in establishing direct, immediate contact with them, implying the necessary presence of goodwill. Viktor Ilyushin continued that one cannot watch without pain films shot on New Year's Day in Grozny, and yet, according to the first presidential aide, several known and still budding Russian politicians exploiting the extremely contradictory reports arriving from Grozny continue to tap a certain goal vein on the tragedy of that republic. For some, it even appears to be a unique type of a political Klondike, said Ilyushin. Today in the White House in Moscow, a closed session was held between the Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin and the chairman of both chambers of parliament, Vladimir Shumeyka and Ivan Rybkin. According to the press service of the Duma, they examined all the proposals and initiatives submitted to date in connection with the situation in Chechnya. For tomorrow, another meeting of the same participants is planned. Today we received information that in connection with the death in Chechnya, the correspondent of the newspaper Red Star, Vladimir Zhitarenko, the Fund of Social Support for Journalists and the Union of Journalists of Russia have adopted a decision to open a special account for the family of the colleague. The account is opened in the VPR Bank. Vladimir Zhitarenko is the 16th Russian journalist who died while performing his professional duty within the last 2 years. Information about the number of the bank account is available by phoning 253 1595 or 201 5101. 6 Russian border troops of the Kalayhunsky Border Regiment, the group of the Russian forces in Tajikistan, according to verified sources, died during an hours-long clash with gunmen of the Islamic opposition on one of the stretches of the 6th outpost in the afternoon Monday and last night. Among the Russian military servicemen, there are also injured. An infantry combat vehicle was disabled. A correspondent of Vitortas learned this today from military sources in Dushanbe. Today, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan decisively condemned the leaders of the armed Tajik opposition for violating the inter-Tajik ceasefire agreement. Meanwhile, 15 people, that includes 6 Russian military servicemen, died in Dushanbe as a result of champagne poisoning, Interfax reports. More than 40 people have been hospitalized with the diagnosis of severe poisoning. 11 of them are in intensive care. According to preliminary reports, in the dregs of the champagne, a very potent poison cyanide was discovered. The investigation is pursuing several versions of the occurrence, one of which is premeditated diversion. New Year came to Armenia, but apparently didn't dispel old problems along the way. 2 fully lit days, in the literal sense of the word, gifted to the people by the government, ended, and 3 million Armenians again found themselves alone with dwindling candles. Yet there were New Year's gifts. Launched into operation was the 400-meter automobile bridge, which connected the center of Armenia with regions which suffered from the earthquake. And now, much quicker, construction cargoes will be delivered into that area. In downtown Yerevan, the longest 840-meter escalator has begun to function, resolving certain transportation problems for urban residents. The pre-New Year activity of authorities again brought to mind the spring parliamentary elections coming coming, and yet the balance of weights with the unamassed dividends is weighed down by unfulfilled promises. The most important thing is that the planned launching this winter of the second energy block of the Armenian nuclear power station did not take place, and when it will be launched are not yet known for financial reasons. However, as was emphasized in the New Year greeting by the President of Armenia, Levon Ter-Petrosyan, the most important thing for the Republic did occur: an almost 9-month peace in Karabakh and on the Armenian-Azerbaijani border. With hope in this, we have entered the year 1995. The festive holiday euphoria is almost over. Residents of Georgia have returned to their mundane reality. What was 1994 really like? With difficulty, but the process of the repatriation of forcefully displaced persons moved out of stalemate, and Georgia again reconfirmed its chosen course for the peaceful resolution of the Georgian-Abkhazian conflict. Steps undertaken recently by the leadership of the Republic to revive the economy have already yielded positive results. That is, first of all, the strengthening of the rate of the national coupon, which to some degree should stop hyperinflation, and the new contract with Turkmenistan on gas deliveries, and also, of course, the receipt of the first major credit from the International Monetary Fund. At the Moscow Interbank Currency Exchange, from the beginning of January, the ceiling has been restricted for the vacillation of the rate of the American dollar per the ruble. The maximum limit of vacillation during any session is 10% from the initial rate at the opening of trading. In the event that the maximum limit is reached or exceeded, a technical break will be called, and the directors of the exchange will inform the Central Bank of Russia about the situation, acting further in compliance with instructions from the Central Bank. The first trading session this year will be held tomorrow, the 4th of January, and the last trading session ended the 29th of December at the level of 3,550 rubles for $1 American dollar. A large stretch of the Oktyabrskaya Railway was put on electricity in the Republic of Karelia. The stretch of the railway from Belomorsk to Sumbasat, for the first time in Russia, was charged with electricity through the money of the railway workers themselves, spending 9 billion rubles on the contact network. They took not a kopeck from the government. And this in the conditions of a severe decline of cargo deliveries, where the majority of companies, partners of the October Railway, barely make ends meet. What prompted the risk of the investment and spend much money otherwise that could have been applied to salary? And now the return from investment can be felt, but the future will be better when, after the decline of productivity, its revival will follow. No one doubts that fact here. The road will be prepared for to manifold times increase its flow of cargo. Therefore, the project has not only economic, environmental, but a highly moral meaning, because in the village, life continues, the road continues. Each kilometer of electrification of arteries and new routes, this reflects the future. From 1998, power will be fed to the entire railway route between St. Petersburg to Murmansk. The decline of the gross industrial yield in the agrarian industrial sector of Russia this year will not exceed the level of 1994, that is, between 6 to 7%, given the condition that the 11 trillion debt to the agrarian sector is paid for agricultural goods they produced last year, and the government can maintain previous levels of support. This was stated to Interfax by the Vice Premier of the Government of Russia, Alexander Zavirucha. In Astrakhan, there are many melons. In Moscow, a great scientific potential. Scientists and producers joined efforts, and as a result, the latest technology in producing pectin was born beyond comparison in the world. In Astrakhan, the first tens of kilograms of pectin were derived, a valuable additive to foods for humans, which quickly expel from the body poisonous salts from heavy metals, radionuclides, with harm and other harmful substances. Russian technology is economically at an advantage to foreign methods. Pectin is derived from feed melons and other gourd field cultures without using acids or acidic composites, which significantly reduces cost of production and makes the product environmentally pure. The development of pectin on the base of the Astrakhan farm in Oguretsk, using the technology of the academic Golubov, immediately was of interest to the foreign specialists, and they know our statistics. The demand for pectin in Russia is not less than 10,000 tons per year. But where does one get it now? If the plant which produces it in Krasnodar is at a standstill, 2 others are in Ukraine. The first batch of the Astrakhan pectin, certified by the Committee of the Sanitary Health Assurance of Russia and approved by the Nutrition Institute of Ministry of Health of the Republic, probably will not be launched soon into production. Today, the fate of the world discovery is sustained through the enthusiasm of the scientist Golubov, the young director of the state firm Koshulakov, who, with risk and fear, invested into the promising product more than 1 billion of the state farm's rubles. For the first time in many years, the Central Institute of Medical Biological Problems is conducting an experiment connected with the work done on shelves by Russian oil companies. 3 volunteers will spend in the underwater chamber under pressure equivalent to that at a depth of 120 meters. Previously, such experiments were conducted only in top-secret laboratories of the military combat forces, and results became known only to a narrow circle of military underwater specialists. This time, through the 3 volunteers, each who will be receive for 1 month in the chamber 8 million rubles, the prolonged effect on humans of extreme depth enclosed in a helio-oxygen atmosphere will be studied. After adaptation in the atmospheric chamber, the aquanauts, according to the program, will have to lift weights. Hence, it will be clear what pressure underwater teams working on the shelf can sustain. Through a special tube, the volunteers will be handed everything necessary, and each one of their movements within the chamber will be controlled through television cameras. According to the director of the project, Kustos 250, Igor Polishuk, the results of this expensive experiment will not be sold to Western companies, although real demand for these results already exists, and it's quite significant. The obligation to deliver fuel sources to the CIS countries provided for in intergovernmental agreements for 1994, in their majority have been overfilled, Interfax was told by the Ministry on the Affairs of Cooperation with the CIS. According to the latest data of the Ministry of Cooperation of Russia, in the 9 months of last year alone, natural gas deliveries scheduled were overachieved to Belarus by 28%, Moldova by 15%, and to Ukraine by 55%. At one time, the pride of the former USSR, the transcontinental oil gas pipelines, into which more money was placed than into any banks or companies altogether, today are under the several ownership of Russia and Ukraine. And despite the various political winds which raise the waves on the Dnieper and Moscow rivers, these transportation arteries work as a whole unit or network. Regarding oil lines along which Russia transports fuel to Europe through Ukraine, here problems arise. Residents of the remote Carpathian villages have learned to somehow bore holes in these pipes along which fuel goes to Hungary and fill not only canisters but entire tanks. Last year alone, 30 cases of major thefts of fuel were recorded. From such holes in the pipeline, oil seeps into the Carpathian rivers, which are the basic source of drinking water for neighboring Slovakia, Hungary, and the Czech Republic. To battle such a form of poaching, recently in Ukraine, a law has been adopted on criminal responsibility for damaging the pipelines and systems. The law provides for a punishment by imprisonment for a term of from 3 to 5 years. Since the beginning of the current year in Lithuania, new rules are in place on the transportation of dangerous cargo and military transit through that republic. The compliance with the rules is monitored by the transportation service created under the Ministry of Defense of the Rim. Such shipments currently will travel through the republic escorted by armed Lithuanian soldiers. In Brest, a protocol was signed on interaction of the law enforcement organs of Belarus and Poland in fighting with organized crime. If previously an alarming situation was created only in the bordering regions, lately incidents with the use of weapons arise within the depth of the territory of each of the sides, incidentally with the participation of the eastern and western underworld. In Belarus, during 1 month alone, 15 criminal groups were neutralized, and not a single one of those groups surrendered without armed resistance. In Poland, during the last year, stolen or forcefully seized were 60,000 automobiles, and the criminals in automobiles often would seek coverage on the neighboring country's side. Therefore, the document adopted in Brest is viewed, not without reason, as the unification of 2 fronts, the western and the eastern, especially since on our side it was signed by the head of the main department of the criminal militia of Belarus, Sergei Rukhlev, who is also at the same time the director of the Special Bureau on coordinating the battle with organized crime on the CIS scale, and here the effort looks promising. The level of crime in Russia and the CIS, as is known, is quite discouraging. Methods of self-defense are becoming very popular, but many don't justify expectations. How can we protect ourselves? Aerosol tubes, small and easy to use, but cannot withstand to be dropped or squeezed too hard and can go off in your pocket under strong pressure. Also, with the slightest slightest wind, a cloud of irritating gas can end up in your face as well. Gas pistols are significantly more reliable, but for them, organs of internal affairs must give permits, and that's quite a nuisance to apply for. And then this rather massive object can't be placed in every clutch bag. Recently, a new method has arrived, and nicknamed the udar, or blow. It's a bursting acidified aerosol. This is a cartridge with 5 gas balloons and a firing device. The udar, the personal defense device, is produced by the Russian plant Mayak, and it's made here only. The Kirov specialists feel that this weapon surpasses Western comparisons and is much cheaper. The main thing is that one can acquire it according to rules provided for aerosol balloons, that is, without applying for permits or licenses. Udar is effective at a distance of 150 meters. It weighs only 150 grams, and it can cause no serious harm to a person, and especially one cannot kill anyone with this device, but one can defend oneself against criminals, and very effectively. The UN Blue Helmets in Bosnia-Herzegovina have begun the operation to relocate their units, which should occupy the positions between the warring sides. This was stated to the journalists in Sarajevo by the press secretary of the peacekeeping forces, the Colonel Jerry Kurd. According to him, this action, provided for in the agreement on ceasefire which has taken effect, may be completed by the end of the current month. The warring sides on the majority of the fronts of Bosnia and Herzegovina are observing the New Year agreement for a 4th-month ceasefire. Combat continues only in western Bosnia near the enclave Bihać. The truce has not yet been signed by Serbs from the Kinska Krajina, the autonomous Muslims, and the Herceg Bosna Croats. The Blue Helmet Commander, General Michael Rose, is attempting to persuade the leaders of all these unrecognized state formations of the need for the agreement currently, and while the cannon fire has subsided, the basic work has begun on humanitarian convoys of the UN High Commissariat on Refugees Affairs. Last year, because of constant crises, they periodically for several weeks couldn't enter the territory of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The number of cargoes will be increased, and of course the weather conditions have grown more complicated. It's winter and there's snow ice in the mountains, therefore it will be difficult, but I think that our group will manage with it. It's objective. And there are such routes along which only Russian convoys travel, and the fact that we travel more than anyone else and in the most difficult conditions, I can say definitely. Thousands of demonstrators rallied at the burial of 3 Palestinian policemen killed by Israeli soldiers in the Gaza sector. As was learned, the Israeli regiment crossed the border of the autonomy, ostensibly in pursuit of several terrorists. However, its movement was impeded by Palestinian security forces. The Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, Peres, who arrived in Cairo, was greeted by the President of Egypt, Mubarak. After the meeting, it was announced that the basic questions of the dialogue were the progress of the Arab-Israeli process and Middle Eastern regularization. A state delegation from Sri Lanka has left to hold talks with the representatives of the group of Tigers for the Liberation of Tamil Lama. The aim of the talks is to immediately reach a ceasefire agreement. 86 more Khmer Rouges have voluntarily surrendered to authorities in the northwest Cambodian province. These defectors are gunmen of the regiment famous for cruelty to the population. According to the authorities, after their surrender to prison under the Khmer Rouge control, less than 30% of the territory of the province remains. Entering the post of the mayor of the capital of the United States is Marion Barry. 4 years ago, he was forced under a cloud of shame to leave the post and served half a year in prison for acquiring and using narcotics. He built his pre-election campaign on his personal repentance, begging the voters to again believe in him and give him a chance to be redeemed. The president of Poland, Lech Walesa, stated today that he will not pay income taxes according to the new levels established by the government. This démarche is assessed as an attempt by the head of state to isolate the Prime Minister, Pavlik, and to create a schism in the left coalition government. The problem is that last week the Polish cabinet of ministers established a new level for income taxes without adopting a respective law. Responding to questions of the press, Lech Walesa said that he will pay taxes according to the law of 1991. The heated debate subsided on the Westminster Palace accounts. Christmas holidays have arrived, and it's time now to stop perhaps listening to what the deputies are saying, at least for a while, and look at what they are wearing. The tastes of the British parliamentary democracy are similar to those of an elderly lady. It's conservative in dress. A suit of a British male parliamentarian is much stricter than his European colleagues. This Scottish deputy is an exception, reconfirming the rule. Outward modesty decorates the national elective. But not everyone agrees with this, incidentally. The most famous parliamentary consultant and stylist pianist Mary Spieling feels that a real man must wear not only a good suit and tie, but as well a splash of bright color. At the session in the end of the week, she recommends that the House of Commons be attended in a sports coat and not necessarily in a tie. But how can one escape the embrace of a grey stereotype? Psychologists indicate the fairer gender. For women, there are no restrictions in Parliament, either in color nor style of suit. And why cannot the stronger gender also be emancipated and feel confident? One of the first to try to do this was the young Liberal leader, Tony Blair, but he began with a $100 haircut, which precipitated a hailstorm of sharp commentary, especially from the ruling party. And who cares about hair? Headdresses are only the mirror of pluralism and deputy tastes, especially since as soon as you don your hat, you should be allowed to speak. Everyone wants to be liked, but it's impossible to be liked by everyone. Brazilians have invented a new method against balding. You buy this bald potato head and pronounce an incantation, immerse it for 10 minutes in the water, and after 1 week, you have such a luxurious mop. True, not on your own head, but on these almost storybook characters, which have gone on sale on all streets and squares of Rio de Janeiro. Maybe the incantation is read incorrectly, but in Brazil there are no fewer shining pates for some reason. The broadly advertised Sanavia method is not helping for turbulent hair growth. So the barber, Antonio Carlos Goyas, made the right decision, opening the very first in Rio de Janeiro, a specialized barber shop for the senoras with receding hairlines. To style hair in Brazil is an expensive luxury, and here there's a discount, and a significant one. Incidentally, the less hair left on the head, the cheaper the cut. You can choose a model to emulate. If you wish to emulate the Brazilian Minister of Economics, Ciro Gomes, who's only beginning to bald, there's a discount of 30%. The new Vice Premier, Marco Macio, the discount is 50%. The hairdo, copying the style of the Senator Espiridion Naimin, is free of charge altogether. The entrepreneur Marco Macer is certain that one should open more such barbershops because it's not in vain. It's considered that balding men are supposed to be the most intelligent, and the genetic wealth of the nation must be preserved and honored. We continue. The New Year's days traditionally become days of premieres in our country. The premiere of the Minkus ballet, Don Quixote, the festival, the Russian winter, and the musical December evenings are underway. And in our program, we will tell you about a premiere in the Czech Republic. In the Prague National Theatre, a New Year premiere, the ballet Tchaikovsky, Pictures and Images in Dance, inspired by the life of the great composer. A concert for fortepiano called Solitude and Death. This was the initial title of the libretto, composed by the director and producer Josef Badnarik. His aim was to illustrate the drama of human life, expressed in immortal and eternal music. This ballet was choreographed by a graduate of the Prague Conservatory, Piotr Malasik, using fragments of Tchaikovsky's works and also from Mozart and Offenbach. He himself confesses his love for Tchaikovsky, admitting that he wanted to ask forgiveness from Tchaikovsky for this experiment, born of only good intentions and a desire to make the life and work of Pyotr Ilyich more understandable and accessible to the contemporary young generation. Tchaikovsky is the music of the Russian soul, great and profound, says the creator of the production. Of course, such an experiment is a controversial thing. Certain scenes could produce doubt, especially among our jealous compatriots of the Russian genius. However, one more thing is undisputable. In a theater where the author himself of Eugene Onegin once conducted, a contemporary, innovative ballet performance has been staged and is warmly received by the Czech public. With this, I bid you farewell and wish you a successful beginning of the first work week of the new year. All the best. Good evening. The youth team of Canada has won the title of the World Hockey Champions, beating the Russian team in the second last round 8-5. Russians can still go for the silver in the event of victory in the final match over the Finnish team. Tomorrow in the Moscow Sports Palace, Sokolniki, the Russian figure skating championship, will open. All the best will be participating, including our Olympic champions, which promises a beautiful spectacle. The earliest to begin their season this year are the tennis players, the largest men's tournament underway in Qatar. Enjoying success, there are old acquaintances, the leaders of the Swedish tennis competition, Stefan Edberg and Magnus Larsson, who in the first round beat, respectively, Ronald Dejanor and Karl Kucher. In the Australian Hopman Cup tournament, the Ukrainian team with Andrei and Natalia Medvedeva entered the semi-finals, where they will meet with the Czechs Gorda and Novotna. Finally, Evgeny Kafelnikov in the first round in the tournament in Adelaide beat Marcus Onrishko. I'll remind you, in the rally Paris-Grenada-Dakar, the second round was won yesterday by the Frenchman Bruno Sabinos on the Mitsubishi. I'll note the success of our Russian Kamaz teams. 3 crews topped the charts of yesterday's level. Details of today's round in the report of Ostankino at 21:40. The Formula One season is approaching. Today, the second driver of the Williams team was announced. Providing company for Damon Hill was David Bullhart from Scotland, hence the temporarily unemployed world champion leader of 1992, Nigel Mansell, who won the final level of the last season. Good evening. After the surprise which weather brought us in the end of the last year and the first days of the new year, when the temperatures on the European part of Russia was higher than the norm by between 10 to 15 degrees, winter again takes its course. The reason for that is a broad cyclone which is shifting from the Republic of Komi to the north of the Ural region and to the Yamal-Nenetsk Autonomous District, and following it through the northwest and northern regions to the center of Russia. A mass of cold air is beginning to enter from the Barents Sea. Therefore, tomorrow on the Kola Peninsula and in the Arhangelsk district, meteorologists expect partly cloudy skies and brief periods of snow. During the day, -7 to 12 degrees. In Komi, it's cloudy with snow and strong gusty winds, with temperatures of -8 to 13. In the south of Komi, -2 to 7. In the Kaliningrad district and in the countries of the Baltic region and also the northwesterly region, also slightly cloudy skies and some brief periods of snow during the day, -1 to 6. The northwest region is colder, -8 to 13 degrees. In the central and Volgovyatsk regions, it's cloudy with periods of snow, further cold temperatures of down to -7 to 12 degrees. Belarus, Ukraine, and Moldova will be in a belt of high pressure. Here, it is variably cloudy with some brief periods of snow, temperatures from -3 to 8. In Moldova, 0 -3. In the Rostov area, in the Stavropol Rim area, and the north of the Krasnodar Rim area, partly cloudy skies, mostly without precipitation, temperatures around 0. In the republics of the Northern Caucasus, there will be the influence of an atmospheric front which will bring cloudy weather into the region with rains, and in separate areas with wet snow. The roads will be icy and there's a possibility of snowslide in the mountains in Dagestan, 3 to 8 above 0, and Chechnya and Ingushetia 0+3. The Caucasus Ridge has become a barrier on the penetration of cold air masses from the north. Therefore, in the republics beyond the Caucasus, it will remain warm, clear weather with temperatures in Armenia +3.8, in Georgia 5.10, and Azerbaijan up to +17 degrees. In St. Petersburg, variably cloudy skies, and it's quite cool, -10 to 12 degrees. Muscovites will see a cloudy day with some periods of snow during the day, -8 to 10 degrees. That was information compiled by the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. Goodbye, all the best.